The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to 2019. Welcome to the 2019 season of American Politics, the reality show. Lots of emails from people around the world over the new year saying, Happy New Year, and we are watching with much entertainment what is going on in the country of the United States. And it is indeed a new year, and I told you that the race would get going early for the presidency in 2020, and it has. Elizabeth Warren announcing effectively that she's running for president, except sort of not really. We're talking, of course, of the Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's been a guest on this program at times in the past. She is announcing that she is forming a presidential exploratory committee. Now, 99% of the time, when you publicly say you're launching an exploratory committee, you're saying, I'm running for president. Launching the committee allows you to start raising money. It lets you start hiring campaign staff that is separate from her Senate staff. Every once in a while, you do get someone who launches an exploratory committee and then never actually runs for president, saying that they explored and what they found was that it wasn't a good idea to run. But there is every indication that this is Elizabeth Warren throwing her hat into the ring and running for president in 2020. Where are Elizabeth Warren's politics in the context of the American left in 2019? I'm actually not going to talk about that yet. I'll talk about that in the next segment. I've told you previously that people who would know have told me that Bernie Sanders will be running, and that there has already been talk of whether Bernie is at a disadvantage if he announces that he's running after Elizabeth Warren makes an announcement that she's running. Well, we're going to find out about that if indeed Bernie announces his candidacy. Of the candidates running so far, Elizabeth Warren is by far the most prominent. We interviewed Richard Ojeda in late December. Interesting guy. Not the most prominent by any means. She is arguably one of the most progressive. I mean, I know that Ojeda sort of attacked the other Democrats as not being real Democrats, and I pushed back and said, well, it's not clear you're a real Democrat either if you want to play that game. You voted for Trump in 2016. But to the extent that we have an assessment of the politics of those running so far, Elizabeth Warren is, of those who are in right now, one of the further candidates to the left. But this is going to be a long Democratic campaign. There are going to be lots of candidates. And there are people on the left who are responding to the reality that there is very likely to be a large number of Democratic candidates for 2020. There are some on the left who are saying, no big deal. The Republican Party had 17 candidates in 2016. Trump won. The voters coalesced around Trump ultimately, and Trump ended up winning. The difference is that there was no power of incumbency factor in 2016. Obama was leaving because he was term limited, and you had two new candidates. Now we have Trump, the incumbent, and a really long, really ugly Democratic primary could allow Trump to slam Democrats and to keep building support for a much longer period of time. Now, the salient point that I want to make here is to assume that merely because Republicans had 17 candidates in 2016 and they won, that Democrats won't be hurt by a long, wild, ugly primary in 2020. I think that that would be a mistake. And I think, Pat, that anybody who is worried about not having enough voices on the Democratic side, number one, is not going to end up disappointed. I think you are going to have plenty of voices on the Democratic side. But number two, it's different running against an incumbent president, even one as wild and wacky and as much of a liar as is Donald Trump.
Yeah, and in 2016, Republicans, they had something like 17 candidates, but it was clear that one candidate stood out from the pack. Like Trump was the main favorite during the entire candidacy, during the entire run. Whereas we can't predict the same thing will happen in 2020. Like maybe there'll be a few swings, and at one point, Elizabeth Warren's winning the election, and at another point, Bernie Sanders is winning the election, and then Joe Biden. Like, I don't know if those swings are going to be entirely good for the party.
There's an argument that this is starting too early on the Democratic side, and not really. I mean, I told you it would start right away in January, and it has, but this is typically when you start seeing the first exploratory committees start. The difference is that the talk around Warren has been going on for long enough that this is really sort of the launching of the campaign. We know she's been exploring for some time. By the way, Warren is not the only one to have an exploratory committee. Julian Castro, former housing secretary and former San Antonio mayor, or current San Antonio mayor, I never remember. He has formed an exploratory committee. Congressman John Delaney has been running since last year. And right now, there is no obvious front runner. Some say Bernie's the obvious front runner, unless Hillary runs again. Well, neither of those two people are running. There are others who say Biden, based on early polling, is the front runner. What we have right now is Elizabeth Warren as the most prominent candidate as of today. There's a generational divide between the sort of Bernie Biden aged candidates, the Warren Hillary aged candidates who are slightly younger, and then like the Kamala Harris, Julian Castro, younger generation candidates. I'm agnostic on all of those characteristics as issues. I care about what is their platform, what are their policy positions, and my MO for 2020. It's the first show of 2019, and I'm telling you right now how I will choose who I support in 2020. Which candidate most aligns with my values and political positions? That's it, okay? People will write in about electability. People will write in about pragmatism. What we learned in 2016 is that calculations about electability and pragmatism did not serve us particularly well. So what I will be advocating for is the candidate who most shares my values, beliefs, and positions, and a DNC that is not going to put its thumb on the scale. Okay, that is going to be my advocacy, and I will keep you apprised as to where I am on that. If everyone votes, remember, half of the people don't vote, and everyone votes for the person they agree with the most on policy, we will be okay. We would be okay. Am I concerned about how Elizabeth Warren is going to be attacked for the Native American DNA fiasco, for a bunch of other stuff in her background, which we'll talk about? Yes, but I'm not worrying about that right now. I'm going to evaluate the candidates on the issues, and that's what I want to look at next with you now. Let's now do a sort of very early evaluation of the Democratic primary so far. The big news, of course, that Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren is apparently running for president. She announced an exploratory committee, but she's been exploring for a while. This basically means she's running. Right now, she's running against West Virginia State Senator Richard Ojeda, who I interviewed on the program, Andrew Yang, running on universal basic income, who I interviewed on the program, Maryland Congressman John Delaney. There are probably others who have announced, but I'm not aware of them because they're not prominent. Julian Castro has launched an exploratory committee. But Elizabeth Warren is the most prominent candidate thus far, by far. And what I want to do is briefly look at her politics compared to those of Bernie Sanders. Now, you might say, David, why are you comparing to Bernie? Bernie's not running. Well, two reasons. Number one, Warren and Bernie are widely assessed as the two most progressive senators in the Senate. So looking at how their views compare is important. Number two, even though you're right that Bernie hasn't announced a 2020 campaign, he ran in 2016. There's already talk of how Elizabeth Warren could be the person with Bernie's views in 2020 if Bernie doesn't run. So let's look at that. And it's really important to remind you, although most of you will understand this, this is not a segment to attack Bernie or Elizabeth Warren. I'm not going to participate in infighting. I'm going to provide you information. And in a general election, I would vote for either Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. When I did my political alignment quiz a couple of months ago, the two candidates with whom I was most aligned politically were Bernie, number one, and very closely behind Elizabeth Warren. It was like 88 and 82% or something like that. So if and when Bernie announces, we will have plenty of time to look at the micro differences between the two. But here's the main sort of distinguishing factor or factors between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Number one, Bernie and Warren represent different segments of American political history. They source from very different political mindsets. Even if today their positions are very similar on lots of issues, Bernie is from the sort of socialistic Jewish hippie wing, and raised in the world of unions and civil rights organizing, denouncing the power of the rich and corporations for the last however many decades. Elizabeth Warren comes from the world of law school, lawyers, was a Republican in the mid-90s, is more about tweaking capitalism than questioning it at some kind of higher level. It doesn't mean that today Bernie's a communist and Elizabeth Warren is a straight up unregulated capitalism. They both are sort of social democrats today. But what's important is that their politics developed from very different backgrounds. When it comes to the economy, the way I summarize it is that Elizabeth Warren is clearly a capitalist who wants to inch towards social democracy in reasonable ways, whereas Bernie is more of a democratic socialist at heart who has tailored his politics towards social democracy because he's a pragmatist. They end up in very similar places. Warren says, let's tweak capitalism to give the working class more power. Bernie says, I will begrudgingly accept where capitalism represents the underpinnings of society, but I'll do everything I can to change the underlying reality of the system. When it comes to achievable policy, they'll be very close. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples as to how these differences will actually manifest in policy in different ways. College educations. Elizabeth Warren wants to keep the system mostly the same, but expand access for low-income students. Bernie wants to make public college and university tuition free, okay? That's a difference on policy. If you look at corporate power and money, Elizabeth Warren wants to mandate that corporate boards have worker representation. Bernie wants to straight up limit corporations from being able to get so big, including limiting the size of financial institutions. That is a much bigger undertaking. You can debate the pragmatics, you can debate the morality, but those are differences. They both end up supporting single payer, supporting postal banking, supporting lots of the same policies. But the theme is Warren wants to restructure markets to help workers. Bernie wants to break down the market system wherever possible by either getting rid of the profit motive or adding a public option. The source of all of this is that they both believe the game is rigged. They agree on that. There's a gap, which a new Republic article says, is that Warren wants to rewrite the rules and Bernie wants to flip the board over, sending the pieces flying everywhere. And I think that that's a pretty apt analogy. As the campaigns develop, if Bernie runs, we are going to have plenty of time to analyze their platforms position by position. But the point today is both of these people as candidates would be well in line with my politics, but they're not the same in their worldview. Their underlying philosophies do differ, and that's not a bad thing. Send me your thoughts about Elizabeth Warren running, about the contrast with Bernie Sanders. I'm on Twitter at dpacman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
It's the first show anyway, of 2019, and the first new member of the day for the year is Tyler Barron. Tyler, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Thanks to Brandon Roybal, who is today's long-term sustaining member of the day, also the first one of 2019. And I am just absolutely taken with the success of the 2019 membership special that we started running yesterday. I announced for the last couple of weeks of 2018 that on January 1st, 2019, we needed to make up some of the lost ground in terms of membership from 2018, starting on the first day of the year, and that we would be running just the biggest membership special of the year. And yesterday we sent out an email telling people, if you want to take advantage of this special, here's how. 106 new members in under 24 hours. 106 new members signing up yesterday and in the early part of today via the 2019 special. If you want in on this deal, and you're not on our mailing list, meaning you didn't get the instructions yesterday, email in through our website contact form and say, David, I want the 2019 special. 106 new members. I would love to get 250 new members in the next day or two total with this just extraordinary special. Pat, you picked up like 7.5 million memberships, I think, but we're not, it seems unfair to count those towards the total. So it's 106 is like the non-Pat membership.
Yeah,
number.
106. That's so many. We're going to have new members of the day throughout the entire year just based on that first day, just based on January 1st, it sounds like. So Tyler Barron,
Yep,
he's lucky to be
fact,
the first one.
Pat is going to be hosting a show where we just thank new members, and that's going to be very, very exciting. He'll also be running on a treadmill during it, and it's a whole special we've got planned, but more on that later. Okay, new members, www.joinpacman.com. If you want the big 2019 special, email me. I'll tell you all about it. Okay, also, for the first time in 2019 today, it is Hatriot Mail. What's Hatriot Mail? Hatriot Mail is when a professional voiceover artist interprets horrible emails that I get. Here's a quick reminder about what Hatriot Mail is.
Hey, we'd probably poison our entire family if Trump told us to. But remember, it's not a cult. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Okay, no introduction needed for this, the first Hatriot Mail of 2019. Let's take a listen to it together and see if it makes any sense at all.
David, you are deliberately trying to look gay with the crediting Obama for Trump's economy. You have Jewish privilege, David, and a major bias. Parkman, the Jimmy Dore of the left. David Pakman is an anti-white, anti-Christian, anti-Gentile Jew. How does a gay Jew become all right, David Pakman?
I assume he means how does a gay Jew become alt-right? The funniest thing in there, Pat, is I'm the Jimmy Dore of the left. I thought Jimmy was on the left, or at least ostensibly.
Yeah, say what you want about Jimmy Dore, but he's definitely left-wing. I don't know what that means. You're the Jimmy Dore of the left.
Yeah.
You're on the left and he's on the left.
I'm not sure. I mean, certainly I would take issue that he is on the same left that I'm on. I think that would be something we could talk about for a long time if we cared to, which we don't. And also, I'm deliberately trying to look gay. That would suggest I'm not. But then, of course, they say I am gay. And just the obsession with sexual orientation from the Hatriots continues to be bewildering. But what I can tell you today is that if you are not on board with the message of the Hatriots, if you want to send them a message which says, no, 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 your views will not be tolerated, you can use the coupon code Hatriot40 when you sign up for a membership on our website, HATRIOT40. That'll save you 40% off of your membership, and Hatriots cry whenever that coupon code is used. Okay, we have news of a major new investigation into Donald Trump's criminality, which broke over the New Year holiday, and it has everything to do with undocumented immigration and the wall Trump wants to build and hypocrisy, which is sort of one of the key tenets of this administration. There is now a New Jersey Attorney General investigation into Donald Trump's golf club in New Jersey, not only hiring undocumented immigrants, we learned about that in December, we knew about that already, but giving the undocumented immigrants that they hired fake green cards and fake social security numbers. This is Donald Trump, the guy who was going to stop undocumented immigration, the guy who's strong on the wall with Mexico, which Mexico is going to pay to build, which obviously they're not going to pay to build, which now Trump wants your money to build. That wall that Trump is so strong on, that's the guy I'm talking about. We're talking about Trump National Golf Club, where in New Jersey, where an attorney representing several undocumented immigrants who worked there is claiming that he has turned over evidence to the New Jersey Attorney General, to Robert Mueller, and to the FBI with evidence of undocumented employees at Trump's golf club. Remember, that's already a crime, hiring undocumented immigrants. They were given fake green cards and social security numbers by Trump's golf club. Now, of course, the Trump organization has immediately denied knowingly hiring undocumented workers. That's an important issue here, because if they truly didn't know that the employees were undocumented, their legal liability goes way down, because if you're not required to find out immigration status and you don't know, you can make the case that you haven't done anything wrong. The problem with that is that if you're providing fake green cards and Social Security numbers to people, the veil of ignorance lifts very quickly. Why would you give somebody a fake green card if you have no idea that they're in the country illegally? And of course, the claims are that the managers of Trump's facility were the people doing this, and that, of course, we're eventually going to hear that Trump had no idea about it. This was the managers. Trump didn't know about it. They didn't have his permission. Everybody's been fired. But the problem is, Trump has always said in business, in politics, the buck stops at Trump. That's who's responsible. Until, of course, it's Trump who's at the top. And all of a sudden now, oh, no, this is an issue much lower down the corporate organizational hierarchy. But what we really have to do, once again, every time there's one of these stories, is step back and consider the absurdity of Trump on immigration. Trump got a ton of attention at the start of his campaign for proudly and loudly saying he's going to stop those bad Hispanic immigrants from coming here. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, and some Trump assumed are good people. Of course, some of them actually work for Trump with fake immigration documents allegedly provided to them by his own business. He's against chain migration, but Melania Trump's parents are now citizens of the United States because of chain migration. He's against people working in the U.S. illegally, except his current wife, Melania Trump, was in the United States working despite being here on a visa that did not allow work to be done. He says he wants to clean up this problem of undocumented workers, but he doesn't do a thing about the companies that are hiring them. And he has a history of hiring undocumented immigrants. How are you going to stop the incentive for the immigrants to come to the United States in the first place if you're allowing companies to go unpunished when they're actually doing the hiring? And then as far as the fake green cards, the weirdest thing about that is, who were they for? In the sense that fake green cards aren't going to fool immigration authorities. So were the fake green cards to lull the undocumented immigrants into a false sense of security? Because if they actually had an interaction with immigration authorities, their fake green cards and fake social security numbers would come up as fake immediately. So I'm kind of wondering even what the point of that was. Consider how far things have degraded politically, that in the old days when Bill Clinton was president, when Bill Clinton nominated people to his cabinet, some of them had to withdraw nominations because it turned out they hadn't paid a nanny's social security taxes. And the right said they must cancel their nominations because of this misdeed. The current president's companies gave undocumented employees fake immigration documents, and it's not clear that there will ever be any consequences for Donald Trump for having done this. The moral majority doesn't really seem like it, right? Send me your thoughts on this. The show is on Instagram at David Pakman Show. I'm on Instagram at david.pakman. Bryant Welch joins me next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Bryant Welch, who's a clinical psychologist and author of the book State of Confusion, Political Manipulation and the Assault on the American Mind. And I have so many questions for you, Bryant, but I guess first, just to introduce our audience to the sort of topic of your book and the angle that you're taking here. When you say the assault on the American mind, what are you referring to?
David, I think most of us now realize something is amiss in America. And I think people have a little bit of a sense that it's something of a psychological nature. What I'm trying to do in State of Confusion is call attention to the American mind, how it functions and why it's been functioning so poorly, and why it is a bigger problem than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is more a symptom of the problem, but the real problem is with what's happened to the American mind. So in State of Confusion, I'm trying to say if we will pay more attention to the mind, there's a lot we can do to still save our country. And if we don't, things are going to deteriorate. I wrote the first version of the book 10, 15 years ago, And if you look in the second version of the book, I document the deterioration that's taken place during that time. And we don't have a lot of time left. We've got to start attending to the mind and understanding that our mind is like any other organ in our body, our stomach, our heart, or what have you. It's wondrous, but it's also limited. It's affected by how we treat it, and it requires a certain amount of care if it's to function effectively.
You talk in sort of general terms about how when we look at political events or political decisions that are made by elected officials, there are often sort of surface level political explanations for some of these phenomena, but there are actually psychological reasons and underpinnings that we should also be paying attention to. And one example would be sort of the decision to go into Iraq after 9/11, right? A country that did not actually have anything to do with that attack. And we can come up with all sorts of political explanations. George W. Bush wanted to finish the job his father couldn't, or it was actually about oil and a convenient excuse, or sort of political explanations. But you believe that there's a psychological underpinning to this that's not getting the attention it should.
Absolutely. One of the things I talk about in State of Confusion is paranoia. And paranoia is a fascinating psychological subject in and of its own right. It's the way the mind tries to differentiate what's inside it from what's outside it. After 9/11, the country was absolutely terrified, understandably. And when our mind is in that kind of terror, when we're filled with anxiety, we try to find some type of external explanation and some type of cohesive way in which we can do battle with the terror. And so after 9/11, our minds were very, very disrupted. We were looking for some way to organize that fear. George Bush was there offering us a solution and saying, look, the problem is over in Iraq, and that's where the enemy is. Target your fear over there, and let's go address it. Now, today, of course, we've got an even worse problem with paranoia, in that we've got a president who's actively encouraging us to project our fears out onto other people, generally with different colored skin. But there are people from Central America coming up into this country trying to destroy us, which is pretty hard to believe. And or that it's the Muslim people of Muslim faith who are trying to destroy America and the threat. So we project out onto, when we're afraid, we don't like to confront the fact that we don't understand our fear. And so we come up with a ready-made, simplistic solution to it. And I spend a lot of time in the book explaining those mechanisms in the mind. And they really are quite interesting. If we're aware of those mechanisms, there's a lot we can do to control them inside ourselves and to help one another with it. But if we're not aware of those mechanisms, we're vulnerable to them. And someone comes along politically and plays to those fears, as Trump is now, and we can do a lot of damage to ourselves, to our loved ones, and to the whole world.
Yeah, there seems to be quite a bit of overlap in the sort of type of thinking that you're suggesting people do in your book to some of the work of Daniel Kahneman, and recognizing that there are certain cognitive biases and heuristics that are at play. So, for example, if we recognize that we are drawn to seemingly simple, neat, and tidy explanations to phenomena in the real world, even if they are not accurate, that might enable us to say, hold on a second, just because I'm getting this nice, simple solution from Trump, hey, let's build a wall, as an example, or hey, let's stop Muslim immigration to the U.S. If we know that sometimes we have this sort of bias towards a coherent narrative, we might be able to stop ourselves and re-examine more critically whether the facts actually bear that out.
Exactly. The thing that we've got going for us in this problem and trying to address it is that the very act of awareness improves our functioning. Awareness. And what the mind must do, if it's to make us feel comfortable, is construct a reality out of the chaotic world that surrounds us. When it has a hard time doing that, it gets very, very anxious. So what Kahneman and others are saying is, look, that creates a bias, if you will, in the direction of validating what we think and what we can think easily. And when people are struggling in that way, they become much less tolerant of people with different points of view. This country has always had a wide range of different perspectives and points of view, but we've been able to contain them and to not be so threatened by other people's point of view that we can't tolerate them and that we start to hate them. So we're always going to have these differences we have, but we don't have to be hating one another, and we can put our minds together and come up with the best solutions we're able to. But right now, you know, the government's shut down. We can't do anything in terms of listening to one another.
What do you make of the success that I don't really want to say the right, although the right is a big perpetrator of this, but it's the elites who have been able to convince Americans that they should all favor policies that are overwhelmingly favorable to those who are already extraordinarily wealthy. We saw this in the 2010 midterms, the first midterms under President Barack Obama, the rise of the Tea Party movement, a movement supported overwhelmingly by people who were not rich and never were going to be rich, just statistically, supporting policy that is very good for rich people. What is happening psychologically that has been a successul movement?
That is the bulk of State of Confusion. That's what I'm writing about. You couldn't have stated it more effectively. If you look at how the mind operates, there are some dimensions to the mind that are more vulnerable to destabilization than others. Paranoia is one I've talked about. But sexual perplexity and gender orientation, gender identity, sexual orientation issues is another. Envy and greed is the third. Those three states of mind I call the battleground states. The reason people are voting against their interest is because these particularly vulnerable states of mind are being triggered, and they serve as powerful distractions against people being able to sort out what's in their best interest. So if you can strike the mind in one of these battleground states that is discombobulating to the mind, you begin to own them because they're going to focus on that. If you're concerned that people of different color are coming into the country, trying to take your jobs, committing crimes, killing your children, well, that's going to get your attention, the instability of the mind that creates, and that's what you attend to, not the fact that some wealthy individual has put $100 million into convincing you to be so scared so that he or she can then run off with all the money and ignore the long-term best interests of the country. So that is what I'm talking about, is how does the mind get triggered in a way that destabilizes it and makes it irrational? And that is our national state of confusion.
What are the techniques that are most effective for people to sort of protect themselves or be armed, figuratively, against this sort of war on the mind or propaganda war that is being waged? Is it simply awareness of these biases and tendencies, or is more required?
Well, let me say the way I would always answer that is to say awareness, awareness, awareness. But I think when we begin to understand what awareness is, we would no longer say simply. Awareness is a remarkable psychological process. It is the process that we have by which we do our awareing, that it's an activity, it's a function of the mind. And when we are aware, if we can name it, we can tame it. And that's what neuroscience is showing us. And it is a wonderful new thing that we're discovering. The brain and the mind are remarkably malleable. They recover. But if we can get people to focus on the problem rather than activating these three battleground states that I talk about, you look at what Donald Trump is doing now of activating, and no one notices that people are running off with the vault with all the money in the process because they're so activated. And that's been going on long before Trump. Trump is just a symptom of the problem. He is not the cause of it. And if you look at what leaders have done in the past in America, take FDR, 1932, things were very dire in this country. Not just the economic crisis, but there was a rise in terms of racism and bigotry. There was flirtation with Nazism. What did Roosevelt do? The first thing that Roosevelt said to us after he became president, first inaugural address, first paragraph, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Now, what he was doing with that was calling our attention, making ourselves aware of our inner state, of what was going on in our mind. And once he identified that, he came up with a series of solutions, ways that we could work together to address that fear. We didn't have to be paralyzed by it. We didn't have to be defeated by it. And he then led to a plan that dismantled the Great Recession. He took on Hitler and Nazism, and it was a result of being able to identify what was going on inside people's minds and then coming up with solutions. And we could have a leader like that that could emerge in America, but we need it.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. In the brief time we have left, on a psychological level of appeal to the electorate, when you look at 2020 and you look at the campaign of some Democrats still to be determined, likely against Donald Trump, what will that nominee need in order to appeal to voters in a way that could defeat Trump?
That candidate is going to need his or her own view of reality. The mind is struggling, the American mind is struggling to support and develop and congeal a sense of reality. And what is the reality that we're all going to buy into? Is it if you look at what was successful about Obama, it was that there was this appeal to hope and what we could become. If you look at what was successful about John Kennedy, it was that with the Sputnik fear, and as scared as we all were with that, there was a lot that we could do. There was a lot that we could look at the fear and then harness it. In this country, I think everybody is terrified economically. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the world, and yet everyone, like 80% of the American people, are living from paycheck to paycheck in a world that's constantly changing out from under them. It's terrifying. And we need to come together and put an end to that kind of economic terror and the abyss that we all feel we're edging ever closer to.
So in a sense, I mean, is it rather than playing point counterpoint with Trump's view of reality, is it creating your own alternative?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. When you go point counterpoint with Donald Trump, you're building up Donald Trump. Donald Trump was a genius at making himself the center of attention. He was running against 16 far more qualified conservative candidates in the Republican primaries, and he stole the stage by being outrageous. What we need is our candidates who will outline their view of reality. Where is America today? What is it we're afraid of, and what do we need to do to overcome it? Now, there are a lot of issues like that, but it requires populism in a way that makes us healthier rather than populism that plays to our fears.
Yes, left-wing versus right-wing populism is actually something we've spoken about extensively on the program. Clinical psychologist Bryant Welch has been speaking with us. The book by Bryant Welch is State of Confusion, Political Manipulation, and the Assault on the American Mind. Bryant, thank you so much for talking to us today.
David, it's been a pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Right-wing terrorism, unfortunately, showing no signs of abating in the new year. Still early, but we have news of just a horrible right-wing terrorist attack that took place in Germany. And we've been speaking about the context of what's going on, not only in the United States, but also in Europe, this context of growing far right-wing nationalism, extremist movements and parties in much of Europe. We've talked about it in Hungary. Poland is having a major issue with it. Stefan Molyneux seems to absolutely love it. Talked about that a couple of weeks ago. France is having this issue. many other countries, including Germany as well. And that is where this story took place. In Bottrop, Germany, a 50-year-old man drove his car straight at a pedestrian who managed to jump out of the way right after midnight on New Year's Day. But 4 people ended up injured when the driver kept going and drove into a crowd with his silver Mercedes at another location. The man fled, but was eventually arrested, and local police say that he made racist comments and anti-foreigner immigrant, I guess it's the same thing, comments. And this has every indication of being another one of these right-wing, deliberate anti-immigrant attacks hitting Syrian and Afghan citizens in the incident. Police ultimately arrested the man in the city of Essen, where the guy kept trying to hit people with the same car at a bus stop. We heard from Herbert Rule, who's the top security official in the particular region where this took place, saying, quote, "The man had the clear intention to kill foreigners." They also put out a statement, and that statement says that investigators suspect it was a deliberate attack that may be linked to the xenophobic views of the driver. Police also believe that this was a premeditated incident, and very quickly, 0 days since the last right-wing terror attack in 2019, very quickly getting that counter back to 0. And there is really nothing positive about these stories. I mean, it's just horrible in every single way. If we have to find some silver lining here or some way to say this wasn't as bad as it could have been, it's that no one was killed. This guy is going to go to prison for a long time. He's sitting there in custody now, presumably knowing that he didn't succeed at killing a single person. And it's sick to even use the language of he succeeded or didn't succeed at killing people. It's what he wanted to do, and he failed. And as of when I looked at a few recent reports, the attacker hadn't yet been named. I'm sure that by the time you hear the story, he likely will have been named. That's totally fine with me not to name this guy. Name him later when the trial gets going, but we haven't been reporting attacker names for a while. And of course, much later on, we sometimes have to mention the names when we say, so-and-so is now at trial. And that's the attacker from XYZ incident or whatever the case may be. But for those who are doing this for infamy or notoriety or whatever other self-aggrandizing reasons they have to do it, I'm not going to be providing them with an ounce of that by even naming them. I know that there are lots of other shows that are doing the same thing. And for the most part, our audience has gotten in touch and said they agree. They write in and say, David, I notice now going back a few stories that you've not been mentioning the names of the terrorist attackers. And I actually like that. And I didn't even realize that it was something you weren't mentioning. In other words, it's so irrelevant what their names are, other than, I guess, if you know them personally in some way, that it doesn't even really feel like it's missing. And that's basically been my policy. Not a huge deal. I just don't know what I add to the story by naming these people. It's another guy. It's almost always guys, men, who tried to kill people and who's in jail. His name doesn't much matter to me, but keeping him off the streets and unable to do this again is what is actually the important thing. We've said before that when it comes to lying by politician, but also when it comes to just lying by liars in general, when people lie about really dumb, little, unimportant things, it signals a different type of liar who might be lying about everything all the time. That's the kind of liar that Donald Trump is. And whenever I see one of these stories of the kind of pointless lying about minutia and really irrelevant things, I remember this person I knew when I was in high school who I came to realize she was one of these habitual liars, lying about things that don't matter. And you really couldn't believe anything she said. At one point, she was lying about how much her glasses cost, saying she had eyeglasses that cost $500. And at the time, I remember thinking, that's probably not true, but I don't really care. Like, it just doesn't make any difference to me whether your eyeglasses cost $500 or you found them for 5 cents at a Goodwill store or whatever the case may be. And later, I came to realize she's lying about everything, including more important things, work-related things and other important stuff. That's exactly the type of liar that Donald Trump is. He lied about his inauguration crowds. He made unforced lies, denying that he had said things which he is on audio-visual record as having said, or claiming that he did something that we know he didn't do, because there would be findable evidence if he had done it, like signing all those bills he sat in front of in the Oval Office near Christmas time in December. He was caught lying again on New Year's Eve, claiming to be in the Oval Office working, waiting for Democrats to show up and negotiate with him about funding the border wall that I thought Mexico was going to pay for. But who pays for the wall is not actually the topic today. It's Trump caught lying again. Donald Trump tweeted, quote, "I'm in the Oval Office. Democrats, come back from vacation now and give us the votes necessary for border security, including the capital W wall. You voted yes in 2006 and 2013. One more yes, but with me in office, and I'll get it built, and capital F fast." Unfortunately, Trump's claim didn't really coincide with reality. When Trump is in the Oval Office, a Marine stands guard right outside the Oval Office door. This is the way it is. This is the way it has been for a very long time. White House reporter Brian Karam posting a picture of the Oval Office when Donald Trump tweeted this. And as you can see, clearly, unless he is invisible, no Marine standing there, meaning no Donald Trump. Now, will Lindsey Graham come in and say, well, listen, the Oval Office is just a metaphor for working, even if that just means thinking about work or tweeting about working or whatever else? That actually is the type of defense we're increasingly hearing from the right. Trump isn't saying he's literally in the Oval Office. He's saying, I'm in D.C. and I'm ready to work if it's the Democrats who are actually willing to. And I was thinking once again, as I was reading articles about this, for the party, for the political movement that claims to oppose relativism and postmodernism and interpreting things differently, they sure are taking some leeway with interpretation, aren't they? Criminality is just a metaphor, says Rudy Giuliani. The Constitution has gone from being a fixed document to also just a metaphor for what the founding fathers wanted based on our interpretation, open to Trump's interpretation and Stephen Miller's interpretation, and saying things, even if they are on audio-visual recording, are merely possible things that have been said. And if Trump later says he didn't say it, well, at least he didn't mean it, right? It's lies all the way down. And it's embarrassing, and there is going to be, unfortunately, no holding to account this administration for the degree of lying that has taken place. If we're lucky, they will be held accountable for some of this stuff. That would be nice, but there is just no way. I mean, the ship has sailed. Forget about the idea that they are ever going to actually be held accountable for all the lies. It's quite disgusting. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-PETE. We have that voicemail line is open 24 hours a day. You can call anytime. Many of you did in and around the New Year holiday. A lot of people had been drinking when they called. One call questioned whether I did something to get Joe Rogan and Bill Burr to talk about me the other day. Take a listen to this one.
Hi, David. It's Clark. Just had a question. This is Clark Kramer. Did you pay Joe Rogan and comedian Bill Burr to speak about you on their podcast? I'm just wondering.
Right.
I just find it hard to believe that they would mention someone as irrelevant as you while talking.
Yeah. That's exactly right. What I did was I found people who have a ton of money and would never normally talk about me. And I offered them an amount of money that was meaningful enough to get them to talk to each other about something they otherwise wouldn't care anything about. That's exactly what I did. It's an amazing thing I was able to do. Absolutely incredible. On the bonus show today, Louis C.K., speaking of comedians, Louis C.K. is sort of in trouble again. And people are now outraged about jokes he made regarding Parkland shooting survivors and gender identity issues. And we will talk about Louis C.K. a little bit. We will talk about how for undocumented immigrants, getting a driver's license could create problems with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, in ways that were maybe previously not known or only suspected, I guess we could say. We will also talk about Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte confessing that he sexually assaulted his family's maid when he was younger. A very odd, unusual, and disturbing story. All of these stories and more are on the bonus show. How do you get access to the bonus show in the new year? Same way as in the old year. Become a member at www.joinpacman.com. Become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. And again, 106 new members on January 1, 2019, with this just incredible 2019 membership special that we are running. If you want to get in on that and you didn't get the email from us about that special, just contact us using the contact form at davidpakman.com. Say, David, I want that 2019 special. What's the deal? And I will send you the information. You can sign up, and it's going to be an absolutely incredible thing. We're back for the new year. We will be here. We don't really have any planned vacations, Pat, until we both leave for a month on Monday. Other than that, we're here for a really long time.
Yeah, and a month-long vacation is well-deserved, I think, at this point. We won't exactly announce when it's going to be. We're just going to let the audience find out on their own. They'll be like, wait, wasn't there supposed to be content being produced by this channel? Like, where did that all go? But after we come back, we'll let you know what happened.
Yeah, we're kidding, by the way. We are kidding. I know people get really mad about vacation time, and I've said before, it's really important that staff get time off, so we do sometimes take vacations, but that's not happening this month. Don't worry. We've got a full, solid month of programs for you. Glad you're here. I will speak to you on the bonus show very shortly.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.